this now because I gave you hosting authority. Can you record this? Or have you already started it? You've already started it.
Just got it going.
Looks like. Thank you very much. Okay, so for those who might not have been able to join us today, thank you for tuning in later and viewing this. We hope it'll be great information for you. Okay, so let me start by introducing at least one person, Charles Boney, who is our chair for the 2021 Fellows Committee. He's going to give a couple of opening remarks, but I also want to make sure that all the rest of the Fellows Committee members and contributing members that we have to the Fellows Committee feel free to engage in this conversation as we go along, because I'll run the PowerPoint and start off, but I really would like help with everybody else jumping in, because you all have unique perspectives on all the different elements that it takes to submit for fellowship. So with that, I'm going to turn it over right now for just a brief introduction to Charles Boney.
Great, thank you. I'm looking at committee members that are out there as well. I see Cheryl Walker, Rebecca Edmonds, Chris Brazier, and there are about 8 of us, I think, on this committee. I'm looking for others.
Mike Cox just joined us too.
Okay, Mike. Hey, welcome in, Mike. We're just recognizing members that are on this committee. Many of us have been serving on this committee for quite a long time. We have recently expanded the committee from 5 to, I believe, 7, and so that's going to help us, I think, with overall with our regional representation, but also in our knowledge of who really needs to be groomed and encouraged at this point in their career to move forward. I want to also welcome NOMA to this. I think this is a great opportunity for NOMA to join this group, join hands in working on recognition for more minority opportunities there, and to help us increase the diversity of what we're doing, not only in the Fellows Committee, but just all over AIA. So welcome to this. I will reiterate what David Crawford has said. This is a great journey to go through when you begin fellowship. It is a real search into your soul and into your past, and to begin to winnow down, what have you done to make a difference? And if you're on this call, chances are very good that you have got some idea of what that might be. I'd encourage you to listen to this presentation. It's this presentation, I think, David, is the same one we have used, or similar to one we have used in past years. And it's really important to take good notes and take all of this information seriously. Your fellows application is not something that you can go out on a tangent with. It is a fairly formulaic in terms of what is anticipated. And the reason for that is, you can imagine, the review committee has got, I don't know, 300 of these things to go through. I'm not sure how many, but they will go through 300, let's say. And of those, 75 might be selected to be elevated or more. And so it is a very selective process, and those people who review those things are looking for 2 things, I think. One is a reason to elevate someone to fellowship, and one is a reason to not elevate and to move an application aside. If you don't follow the formula, that's a good reason to move that application aside. So, as much as I know that architects do not like to follow the rules, this is a good time to follow the rules. So with that, Dave, I will turn that over to you, please.
Yeah, and I'm quite sure that we will have a number more comments about following the rules as we go through the PowerPoint. So yeah, this is thank you, Charles. This is the PowerPoint that we've used for the last, probably 20 years of doing this program. It is updated annually by the AIA, and so I have pulled down the most recent copy that the AIA has on their website, which they did. I think they just posted it. So this is it. For those of you on the Fellows Committee, it does have a little bit of a different look to it, but I think most of the information, except for a couple of key areas, which we will touch on in just a few minutes, are a little bit different. So welcome to the Demystifying Fellowship Program. I do want to again acknowledge the fact that we have been working with the NOMA chapter in North Carolina really close to for the last year on developing coordinated programming between our organizations. And as we were having discussions, we hit upon this particular program that we do, and it really did spark interest with our friends from NOMA. And I know Verche and Zakia at least are on the call today, and thank you for being with us. I want to encourage you guys at any point to feel free to chime in whenever you like. I do know that we've got a portion coming up in about 10 slides or so, where we'll talk a little bit more about your guys' involvement as well. But thank you all for being here. Okay, the overview. College of Fellows, the modern college, was founded in 1952. I want to rely heavily in this program on Rebecca Edmonds, who has been an outside consultant for us for well over a decade. It might be 15 years now, I think, in helping our Fellows program. And for those of you who are interested in submitting for fellowship, Rebecca is the go-to resource in the country for consulting on this particular AIA program. So many of the members of our Fellows Committee have used Rebecca for her consulting services over the years. She probably has the most knowledge of the Fellows as well, and just in terms of history, because I'm told she actually rewrote the history book.
That's correct.
Did you do that? And 2 years ago, you rewrote the history book. So
they have not put out a new issue since 2019 because of COVID and because they haven't had an investiture. So we will be looking at it to update it, just in terms of chancellors add their history, the history of the year that's passed, every year. So there will be one massive update for the 3 classes that will sort of converge.
Okay, so literally what Rebecca's talking about is when you are elevated to fellowship and you're on the stage and you cross and you get your medal and you shake hands with everybody, they give you literally a history book as you are walking off the stage, and that's the book that Rebecca
and your name will
authored.
appear
That's right.
your class.
That's right.
So
that's a very nice thing. Okay, so I don't think I need to read too much more of that. Let's get into the purpose of the College of Fellows. Clearly stimulate sharing and interest among fellows. And when we talk about stimulating sharing of interest among fellows, you're going to see as we go through this presentation what that really means, because I think it's the cornerstone of what fellowship is about. You don't really receive fellowship unless you can tell a story that you have in some way imparted knowledge to the profession or to the public or to other entities about architecture or for architecture. So also promoting the purposes of the Institute, there is an object that goes along with that, and advancing the profession of architecture, mentoring young people, and of course to be ever increasing service to society. You're going to see these words show up just a little bit as well in some other slides that we're going to go through. Okay, so the statistics for fellowship, as Charles mentioned earlier, they get somewhere in the neighborhood of 300. I think it's the high 200s now that they have been receiving over the last few years of submissions for the year. And you can see in 2021, so this year, 239 candidates, 101 were elevated. That's actually a little bit low number, I think. And this number, 42%, was pretty low as well. That number has actually been going down in the last few years. It has everything to do with the composition of the jury and the types of folks that they actually put on the, is it 7-member jury?
It is a 7-member jury, yes.
7-member jury. So what you can see here is first year submissions. The vast majority of people that are elevated in their first year. And then it steadily goes down from there. We don't ever discourage anybody if they don't make it in the first year, because we in this chapter have had plenty of folks who have been second and third year submitters that have actually been successful in those years. And a lot of that has to do with help that our committee does give to our fellow candidates here in North Carolina, which is a little bit unusual from a lot of the other components around the country. There are a handful of components, and it's usually the larger ones that have a fairly robust fellowship program. New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Philadelphia, and North Carolina are examples of really the robust fellows committees that are in place. The vast majority of the components around the country don't have much of a fellowship program, but we have always put a premium on that here in North Carolina, and that's why we do have so many fellows in our state.
I'd also add that your process is a lot more transparent and supportive, because I work with, all those groups, and just the support that you get from the North Carolina's committee, where everybody's really invested in getting you elevated, is very unique.
Yeah, there are some committees out there I've heard that have a real sort of gatekeeper mentality to them. We're going to have a little bit more of a discussion about that in just a couple of minutes as well, but that is not really a focus of our process here in North Carolina. So the percent of elevated candidates by object. So the objects are the 5 areas, and this year it's 6, and we will talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But object 1 is actually design. And you can see maybe 25% are elevated in design. Practice is number 2. That is the largest category of submission by far of any category for fellowship. And you can see well over 50% of the submissions are elevated in that category. Now, just a bit of a change this year. Rebecca, check me if I'm wrong about this. Object 2 has actually been bifurcated into 2 different objects this year, which we're going to get into a little bit later.
And that you'll see, so that'll balance it out. Because object 2 has been so, kind of large, I think it was a wise decision to split that apart.
Yeah, and just so you all know, they have not changed these objects in probably 25 years. As long as I've been doing this, they've always been the same. Object 3 is led the Institute. So if you're an AIA junkie and you've contributed a whole lot to the AIA over the years and you can demonstrate that, that's the category for you. Object 4 is public service. And so folks who basically have worked in the government realm or through other volunteer organizations or different industries, that's object 4. And then the catch-all is alternative careers or volunteering or service to society. As you can see, it's fairly low percentage there, but occasionally we do have some really good candidates in that area. All right, let me go to important dates. So this comes right off of the AIA website. So I guess the process for opening is June 29th. And what does that actually mean, Rebecca?
That means that they open the website and you can start the online submission process. I'm hoping that one of the things I certainly have it and can share with everyone is the sample application, which you can it's a PDF form, and you can start to understand the fields that the online submission form is looking for, because it's several pages like there are other award submissions. So it's fairly complicated, in terms of what has to be gathered. So it's good to get that early, but June 29th is when the site is open and you can start that process. And you get to put everything in and save it as you go, right up until the moment you submit.
Because there will be lots of changes as you go through the process.
Correct.
Deadline here, I think they made a misprint. I think they
Yes.
just didn't update this to 2021. But do you think it is October 15th, 2021?
No, it is not. It is a week earlier.
Okay. So let's
Yeah.
make a note of that. So it's actually this.
Let me
8th?
see if I get you the exact date here.
The 8th.
It is
The 8th. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
They've moved it around a lot the last few years. So
Yeah, they have, because it used to be later in October.
right.
Okay, on to the submission process. Clearly, your submission needs to be clear and concise, and results oriented. Now, this is kind of the most important part of our presentation today, is the results oriented portion of this. We like to call it the so what factor. It doesn't really matter if you've served on a lot of boards or held a lot of positions. It's great to list those things, but what did you accomplish for the profession while you did those things? That's what fellowship is looking for. So I know that, and of course it has to be well documented. One of the things, and Rebecca, this is kind of where I ask you, when you start working with somebody and they're just starting the process, what is it you tell them to do?
Well, that would be a little bit long for this. I do think that the best place to start is a complete CV or resume, written in reverse chronology. But what I would say about results is you're looking for metrics. You're looking to compile information about how many people, how many projects, what's the volume of square footage you've created in a certain building type where you've added to that typology. So it's very much about gathering the data and gathering metrics. Like if you've presented to people, how many people, right? Those are the things that are going to be essential to elevation. Documentable metrics on what that influence was. I always tell people that, how did you move the needle? If you were not involved in this endeavor, it would not have been the same. So,
right.
A couple of points. But.
Exactly. And I do think a lot of folks start this process in a chronology way. I did this during these years, and that's great. I think that gives you some structure to do that. But then you need to look at all of those things that you did and say, okay, what was my accomplishment in doing that? what did I contribute to the profession by doing that?
And I would actually advise, because you're going to have to do it anyway, is that you do that CV in reverse chronology, because the jury is interested in the last 10 years of your career, what was accomplished. And endeavors that happened before that 10 years may be valid because they may support the overarching impact that you've had, but really starting in reverse chronology puts you in the right mindset. And then you don't have to switch it because it is what they ask for.
Right. Right. And so you can see on the next slide here, essentially, we're saying exactly the same thing here is, why is it significant? What did you accomplish? How did it benefit or was shared with the profession? This idea of sharing with the profession is extremely important, we found through the process. So if you have given a lot of talks at conferences, if you have been prolific in writing, those are some of the best ways of sharing. And the jury really loves to see a lot of that, because that's something that's quantifiable. They can look at that list and say, whoa, this person has produced 45 different articles and 7 books, and they've spent a lot of their career sharing information with the rest of the profession. And then, of course, the whole prove it through documentation and support. And that's really what your submission is all about. Okay, so eligibility. Who is eligible to be elevated for fellowship? So at a minimum, you have to be a member in good standing of the AIA and an AIA architect member in good standing for at least 10 years to be nominated. That does not mean associate membership. Unfortunately, it's got to be AIA membership. And then 10 years of cumulative years as an architect prior to the nomination deadline. Okay, so there are paths to get to fellowship, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this because there's something in here that's unique to North Carolina. So AIA will tell you that there are 2 ways, essentially, and I actually call it 3 because they've included the first 2 in number 1 here, and that's by an individual member to petition for fellowship, for nomination, with either the signatures of 10 architect members or 5 fellows in good standing. I consider those 2 different paths. They call it 1 path. Or you can get the AIA chapter, your AIA chapter, to nominate you. And that's essentially what our Fellows Committee is all about. Back in 2002, we actually encountered a situation here that really upset a lot of us, and it upset me. It also upset Marvin Malika, who was tapped to come on our committee at that point. But I'm going to share this story because it's important to illustrate why we actually created a 3rd path in North Carolina. And the path is this. It's if you are essentially not known to our Fellows Committee, and we had 5 members of the Fellows Committee. And it could be a very common occurrence that you've got some folks working in areas of the state where these 5 fellows just might not have come across their career. They might not know you. We felt it was really important to develop another path that allows a local section to bring forward fellow candidates. And so we developed the process by which somebody could go to the local section, ask their local section for a letter of nomination, could be signed by the local president, or it could be signed by the state president of AIA. and then just 2 fellows anywhere in the state would sign that letter as well. This path was created in response to a situation that occurred in 2002, having to deal with Phil Freelon, actually. And it was, Phil had been elevated in actually 2003. The process for submission happened in 2002. And he called Marvin and I to his office back in 2003. He said he needed us to understand what happened with his nomination, because we had thought the chapter AIA North Carolina had actually nominated Phil for submission, and turns out that the chapter fellows committee did not do that, and he was forced to actually seek out 5 fellows to get his nomination. None of us in leadership at that point knew about this, and Phil just wanted us to know what had happened, and he pretty much on the down low, he didn't want to make a big deal of it, but both Marvin and I felt that this was important enough that it really needed to be dealt with. And this is what I mean by a gatekeeper mentality of some of the states. Apparently we had some of that here in North Carolina, and we needed a separate path around that. And so we created that 3rd path here in North Carolina, really as a result of that experience that we had here with Phil's nomination. So we've had a few folks come to us that way, and some have been quite successful. And it shows that there are lots of good fellows candidates in this chapter around the state, and the 5 people we have just don't always know who they are. This is one of the reasons why we did increase the size of the committee this year to 2 additional. So we're going to have 7 on the committee moving forward. And also reaching out to other groups for input for nomination as well, like our friends at NOMA. So I just wanted to tell everybody that story, tell you the 4 different paths that we have here in North Carolina. So Verche, Zakia, do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
Sure.
Dave, can you just repeat the criteria on that last option?
Yeah, so it is, and I'm sorry I couldn't put it on the slide here because this is not a PowerPoint, but it is a letter that is signed by either a local section AIA president and 2 fellows within the chapter, and that's anywhere in North Carolina, or the president of AIA North Carolina and 2 fellows within the state.
Thank you.
Dave, if I could just add,
Yep.
one of the biases of some of these fellows committee is also toward young people. This was for long thought of as an organization of, forgive me, old white men. And that was quite clear in the history book. In the rewrite, there were not milestones for women and minorities. So I had to unearth those and add them. But there is a big bias, there was or has been, about people under 40 receiving fellowship. And I've worked with many students, many candidates who were turned down by their state committee and had gotten my name. And one of my favorite things to do is to see some of those younger faces achieve fellowship. I think it's a really important to the transformation of both the college and the AIA itself. So
Yeah.
don't be deterred if you are under 40 by this award. All you need are those 10 years as an architect.
Yeah. This is not a tombstone award at all, and it should not be viewed that way. So Verche, Zakia, you guys have any comments you'd like to make?
We do, and really appreciate the comments and the conversation we're hearing so far. I think where Zaki and I are in our careers, a lot of this is new to us as well. So it's really enlightening and quite informative. And also appreciate you kind of going through highlighting some of the things that happen with Phil. So that said, we're just gonna have a few sentences about just a little bit of background of why we're so passionate about being involved with this effort. So following in the footsteps of our national chapters, NCNOMA and AIA North Carolina successfully and collaboratively generated a regional MOU that was approved and signed by representatives of both organizations in February of this year. As a result of that, our chapters continued robust conversations and immediately dove into actionable efforts to address justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the architectural practice in North Carolina. In the midst of working through our largest initiative to date, Say It Loud North Carolina, which it's, I think, important to mention that Pascal Sablan, who was recently elevated to fellow this year, is also under 40 and a woman of color. So kind of ticking a number of those boxes, which make particularly people like Zakia and myself in our NCNOMA chapter very excited.
She's the youngest person ever to achieve fellowship.
That's amazing, just incredible. So through that, our efforts with Say It Loud, in which we will celebrate the work of over 100 BIPOC and female designers in our local community, in our North Carolina community. Our team discovered that of the 89 active members of 89 fellows of AIA's North Carolina's active membership, only 17 are female and merely 6 are people of color.
So combined with our knowledge of Phil Freelon's fellowship experience and lack of support in North Carolina, we, as the next generation of practitioners and leaders and hopefully fellows, were surprised and both disappointed. So fortunately, through our work in partnership with AIA North Carolina, we set our initial reactions aside and began to seek opportunities for equity and change. So the open information session that we're part of today is really evidence of starting that work and having those conversations with each other. And so our goal is that through the work of NCNOMA and AIA in North Carolina together, we can increase that access to information, both getting started with connecting fellows in the community in North Carolina to make more opportunities equitable for people of color and women.
And just to let you all know, as representatives of and active board members of NCNOMA, with Zakia serving as vice president and me as AIA liaison, we are listening intently. We've already started taking notes, and we'll be thinking of ways that we can support and collaborate with AIA North Carolina for our members of color, pursuing with the desire to pursue fellowship. We're again incredibly excited to be involved in these continued efforts as we hope to push the needle forward in representation that is reflective of the outstanding achievements of our diverse community of practitioners.
Additionally, if you're interested in being a part of the continued conversation and supporting NCNOMA, we encourage you to both become a member and attend our general body meeting this Saturday at 10 a.m. I can post the link for that in the chat. And thank you so much, Joel and Dave, for your open-mindedness and the enthusiasm that you bring to the table to have these conversations. And we'll turn it back over to you.
Hey, thank you guys very much.
I'd just like to add one statistic. Only 131 African Americans across the country have achieved fellowship, and not all of those fellows are living. So I'm also here to help. If anybody ever has any questions as you go about these efforts, just let me know, because it's a gap that is sizable.
Definitely.
And Dave, if I can jump in real quick, this might be a good moment to say that another way to break these barriers down is for the younger folks on this call. If you are not ready to submit for fellowship, there are associate awards and young architect awards that you can prep for that are very similar, that are stepping stones to fellowship. So I encourage you guys to look into that if today's meeting doesn't meet exactly where you're in your career.
That's a great point, and something I want to highlight now, because we've talked about this with NOMA as well, but Shauna, maybe Shauna, you are on the call, I think somewhere, is actually we're revamping some of the awards in the EP area, simply because of this. And so we've got 2 new awards coming this year, which will be rolled out in July. So be looking for those. We're going to bifurcate the Emerging Professional Award as it is constituted right now. We're going to create a Young Architect Award and an Associate Award. And then we're also developing an Emerging Professional Friendly Firm Award and certification as well. Did I get that right, Sean? Okay, thank you. So lots of great things happening in the chapter as a result of all the conversations we've been having over the last year. Okay, so those are the paths. So how do we start the process? Let me go to the next slide here. Composition of your submission. Section 1 is essentially your sponsor letter and your summary of achievements. I will tell you that the Fellows Committee here in North Carolina, we spend a lot of time on the summary of achievements page for the candidate. And the reason for that is this is one of the first things that the Fellows jury will look at, besides the sponsor letter. And they'll look at it to see if the structure of it matches up with what you're describing in section 2, which is your significant work, and your exhibits in section 3. And so I dare say, Rebecca and Cheryl, that we've been successful with our candidates over the years because of the rigor we put them through in terms of that alignment between the summary of achievements and then what flows through the rest of the submission.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so we'll talk a little bit more about each one of these as we move along here. Okay, so the submission documents include a very, very strong sponsor letter. You need to spend a lot of time thinking about who your sponsor will be. A lot of folks believe that if you just go after a name, somebody who is known by everybody, that's going to get you fellowship. That is not the case for fellowship. There are lots of stories through the years of Starchitects writing just horrible sponsor letters and reference letters that do not speak to the specific accomplishments of the candidate. And that hurts your submission as much as anything. And so what you really want is a fellow who actually can write to your strengths.
And also be an advocate for you in the process, right? I mean, their role is very important in terms of being your best critic and being your best advocate.
Yeah, the most successful candidates we have, they really have very strong sponsors because the sponsors act as an ongoing critic for you. And that's what you're going to need. We'll talk a little bit about the critique process that we go through, call it the pinup process in a little bit. But you only really get 2 shots with our Fellows Committee at that. But you should be working on a regular basis with your sponsor on a pinup basis and sharing information and the drafts that you're going to be going through with your sponsor. Needs to be well organized, 40 pages. Folks, a page is a page is a page. Page is not a piece of paper. A page is a page. When you look at a book and you turn the page, you have page 1 and page 2. Those are pages. Okay, so people ask, oh, is that 40 pieces of paper or is it? No, it's a page. So you get 40 pages. Does that include the reference letters, Rebecca?
That does not. Yeah, and what you're referring to in terms of the book, it's single-sided, right? You don't get 80 pages.
Correct.
You get 40. And the only free page, that includes your sponsor letter. And there is, so you get 1 page for the sponsor letter, 19 pages, 1 for your summary, 18 pages for section 2, 20 pages for your exhibits. And you get 1 free page, and that is your exhibit list. That does not count in 40, and that's it.
Okay.
So if you want to use dividers, section dividers, or anything like that, they come out of that 40.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind.
So basically, this is a PowerPoint deck of 40 slides.
Exactly.
That's
correct.
Another way to think about it than pages.
That's correct. Yes, and let's be clear, the submission process is all electronic now. So, used to be you did these things and you thought you were actually, building a publication. No, it's an electronic submission at this point. So landscape format is preferred. This comes from the national office. And so we had spent a lot of years trying to figure out whether landscape or portrait was the best way to do it. Apparently they're saying landscape now. So,
because it's projected in the jury session, right? That's right. Because so if you use portrait, you have to understand that when it's projected, it's going to be pretty small. Yeah. And it's going to have less of a visual impact when the whole jury meets.
Right. And I know I've heard you talk, Rebecca, for years about the font size, but they finally have put a minimum on font size at 10 points.
And please use the sans serif font.
A sans serif font, yes.
Good.
Yeah. And then images and exhibits really need to be high quality. You're presenting to a bunch of architects who are used to doing presentations and used to high quality material and high quality images. So they're going to expect that out of all of the submitters. And then leadership results, that's the most important thing. That's where the so what comes in. We always say this every single year is you've done a lot of things, but so what? What has it meant for the profession? So that's the results portion that they're looking for. So your sponsor, it must be either a fellow or an AIA, member in good standing. We do usually recommend that it is a fellow. If there is somebody of unique stature within the AIA that is not a fellow yet, that would be an individual case, but we usually do recommend that it is a fellow. And it does not have to be.
I asked
What's that?
AIA archives about whether they could find me an AIA member sponsored, just AIA, and they couldn't really, none came to mind. So best to go with a fellow.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when you look around the country and some of the folks who you would think would be a fellow, but maybe are not. I mean, Ed Mazaria for the longest time was not a fellow. He's somebody I could think of, well,
Yeah.
if Ed Mazaria is writing you're being a sponsor for you, then that's probably doesn't matter that he has an F after his name or not. He is now. I just learned that, Mac Scoggins and Merrill Elam down in Atlanta, they're not fellows either, which surprised me. But
Daniel Leeson only became a fellow recently.
Right.
I mean,
right. So, but there aren't a whole lot of folks in our state that I could point to like that. But that also brings up the issue of, should you have somebody within your local section, your local chapter, be your sponsor? That's not necessarily always the case. It usually works out that way because your sphere of influence is going to be generally around, where you're geographically located. But, we do have a lot of candidates who might have national connections, and they might have a fellow in another state that could be a good sponsor for them. But again, somebody that you need to be able to work with closely. Somebody that knows you very well. Ideally, not somebody from your own firm. And we've had lots of discussions about that over the years. We have had folks that have done that before, and they've been successful. The AIA, our Fellows Committee, will give you advice about that. One of the first things we do during the first pinup, which will be in August, we'll go through the calendar in a minute, is we do ask you, number one, who's going to be your sponsor, and who do you have on the list as your reference writers? And the Fellows Committee will weigh in with you on that. A sponsor may sponsor more than one candidate. We don't particularly recommend that you find somebody that is sponsoring more than one, because it's enough of a process just to sponsor one person. You don't necessarily want to get yourself involved with somebody who's doing multiple folks, because they're not going to be able to give you the amount of time that you really need. Okay, so what does the sponsor do? They write the letter, they assist you in helping to craft the submission, and then one of the biggest things they do is they work with your reference writers, and they wrangle your reference writers as well, make sure that those letters are getting in on time, that your reference writers have the material that they need to write a good reference letter. So that's a big job for your sponsor. This is just sort of administrative, addressed to the jury chair. It's just one page, and it does okay, must be uploaded with the submission portfolio.
Yeah, it's typically the first page of your submission.
Okay, so it's not separate.
No.
Okay, so it is the first page of your submission. Okay. And again, just like the summary of achievements, the one-page summary of achievement, the sponsor letter really ought to hit the bullet points of what the submission is going to cover. All right, section one, focus on about 3 main points. So we've had candidates over the years that are just fabulous architects, and they have accomplished so much, and it is almost impossible for them to boil down their career into just 3 points. And what y'all need to know is this is not necessarily about your career. This is about what you've given to the profession, right? And so you can start, as we talked about earlier, with this laundry list of achievements. And when you do that, you will start to see themes that develop in your career. And it might be, you've done 20 different projects in this building type that you didn't even think about during your career, but that could be a theme that we pull out of your story here. That you've done this sort of building type, and you have given the profession all sorts of information and lectures about the best way to do this building type, right? You might not have ever thought of it that way, but that's a theme, and that would be a main point in your submission. We actually started this process geez, decades ago in really focusing on 2 to 3 main points. And national never actually even gave you that suggestion. It was always left up to the individual to decide, well, how am I going to attack this? But we were always pretty strategic about, you need to hit 2 to 3 main points. So it looks like national really has adopted kind of what we were doing for a number of years. And then you expand on those points out of the summary section into section 2. And you're going to restate all your claims from the sponsor letter and the summary sheet, but you're going to go into far more detail in section 2. So the ripple effect. Shirley, you want to talk a little bit about how you see the ripple effect and how the fellows jury looks at it?
You talking to me, Dave?
Yeah.
Okay. While fellowship is something that you know, most of us don't think about day to day, and part of the purpose is that we're engaging so many new and younger people is that while you might not have reached a point in your career yet where you maybe have reached that wide ripple effect, we're trying to build awareness and pipeline and support for people to be able to think about this and develop your narrative about it. So the ripple effect means you're not looking at the person who's just a fabulous person in your firm and you brought in a lot of business and et cetera, et cetera. Those are great things, and that's why you might become a partner or you might get a great raise. But what is important to AIA is that your impact, the narrative that you tell, has to do with, it's not about doing your job well, it's about a greater impact beyond being successful within your firm. You substantiate that through your speaking and your publications, your mentoring, your service to the profession, or in some cases, as an architect, beyond your profession. But you're looking for things like geographic impact. We used to say, well, that needs to show national impact, but I think we've recognized that geographic impact is important, but that might be regional. I mean, in some rare circumstances, it might just be within your state, but typically you're looking at beyond your state lines, a greater regional, and in some cases, national impacts that are recognized and can be documented. And ultimately, you know, this legacy that you are developing is, you know, something that goes forward and affects other people and can be documented through your impact and legacy on others.
Right. So this is again the so what that we've talked about so many times. So what, you did all this stuff. How did it affect other people in the profession? The geographic issue is really important because we've talked about this at length over the years, and this does come into play, especially in design, because there's the design category. There's a lot of discussion about, well, I haven't won national awards. Yeah, this does ebb and flow as the jury makeup at the national level changes. But we haven't had a whole lot of national honor award winners from North Carolina, but we certainly have had plenty of design fellows who have gotten their fellowship in the design category that have won lots of local, state, and regional awards. And so don't be too put off by that. You might have heard on the street, hey, you got to do stuff nationally. No, you can do a lot of stuff regionally and still have a major impact. Okay, so the section 2 accomplishments is pretty pro forma stuff. You guys on the committee, tell me if you want to go through any more of this in major way, because we're going to lose some time here if we spend too much time.
I'd only say that the order of 2.1 just depends on the object you're in. So that's the only thing about 2.1.
So how do you mean that?
So if you're going in Object 3, service to the Institute, your AI involvement comes first, whereas you see here it's listed fourth. You're
right.
going in practice or design, your projects come first. So
Got it. Very good. And so 2.2, honors, awards, and recognition. Again, that's a really big area. And 2.3, publications as well. Okay, tips. Again, we keep hitting on the same thing, that broad influence, the ripple effect. It's all throughout the submission. It's going to show up in just every part of what it is you're doing for the submission. Explain any time gaps. Oh, yeah. So if the time gaps issue, Rebecca, how important is this one?
I'd say it's declining in importance. It used to be that if you, let's say, practice for 5 years and were an active AIA member, architect member, and then went off and on sabbatical for 2 years and wasn't a member, but then came back and was a member for 5 years. They want to know what you were doing with those 2 years that you weren't a practicing architect. I think as long as your story is concise and comprehensive, explaining those gaps becomes a moot point. But I look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Right. Okay.
Shouldn't derail anyone. Is what I'll say.
Okay. Section 3, these are your exhibits. So lots of images here. So section 2, you're explaining a lot of things. Section 3, you're really showing a lot of your results, your tangible exhibits here. So a lot of your images will go in here. So in the design category, you show more than the minimum of 5 projects. Probably going to do 7 projects or so. But of course, and this probably goes without saying, really only your strongest projects. And then as Rebecca mentioned in the last slide, if you're not going in design, then you're not going to put your projects first. Although if you're not going in design, this is what always sort of—
That's a little misleading, because if you're practice, you're going to put projects first.
Yeah.
You might have one on your first one might be on your process. So I guess that's what you mean. It's a little vague.
Right. Okay. References must remain confidential. So what does that mean? Does that mean you can see the reference writer's letters? That doesn't.
No.
Yeah.
According to the AIA, if you or your sponsor see your letters, it is grounds for disqualification.
Okay. So basically your sponsor needs to work with your reference writers to make sure that they've got all the necessary information, that they're hitting the points that you want your reference writer to make about you and about your accomplishments. Because what you're going to do is you're going to select your references based on those 3 areas of influence that you're going to talk about in your submission. And you're going to pick a reference writer. Okay, I want this one to talk about the #1 issue in my submission, and I want them to go into detail about that. And so that's kind of how you have to think about your references. But no, you're not supposed to see their letters, but you do give them as much information as they need to write a good reference letter. And again, don't pick a star architect just for the name. They had better know you pretty well.
And David, to reinforce that, your sponsor should help frame those letters from your references as well, and really help them. If you've got 3 points that are major parts about your accomplishments, be sure that sponsor drives those points home in your letters of reference.
Exactly.
because if your sponsor can assist in framing it for you, and they can be the liaison to your reference writers, but they will never see those letters at conclusion, and those letters go directly from the reference writer to the AIA and remain confidential in perpetuity. But if your reference writers, if you've got a reference writer and he says, boy, he was a great leader of the Boy Scout troop, but your whole presence and your whole argument is about certain other things, those you're going to call your list of potential reference writers as you develop your submission to have ones that are very particular to your focus 3 points and can write a 1-page fabulous reference letter on your behalf, focusing on at least one or two of those points.
Right. And the only way you ever find out if you had a bad reference letter is if you haven't made it to fellowship and you get a debriefing afterwards and they tell you.
And I'm always stunned when I get a second-year candidate who wasn't elevated, and we we're on their debrief, and then we chat afterwards, and their sponsor are like, oh, well, maybe so-and-so was a risky letter. There should be no risky reference letters in your list. That's just waste your time and money and that of your letter writer. You should pick people who you know are going to support your elevation and who are knowledgeable about your impact.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'd like to clarify the sponsor's participation with reference writers. I've been on both sides of that, and in every case, the sponsor has known a lot about what the reference writers were putting together, and has given good advice. I know I've gotten advice from sponsors on what I should be writing about a candidate or what was missing in my letter.
Okay.
They do participate a good bit.
Okay. And that's okay pursuant to the rules, Rebecca?
They've gotten much, and I'm actually aware of the specific instance and who sort of raised this issue, but they used to be a little more relaxed about sponsors seeing those letters, but in recent years, so in the past, sponsors often did receive a draft of the letter and add edits to it and inform the process. Nowadays, that is really frowned upon. But I do encourage sponsors and candidates to provide pretty clear guidance on what you want them to speak to and provide the exhibits related to that, because the exhibits, the summary is just really this sort of high level of information, even though it is specific, where the exhibit will allow reference writers to truly understand the case that you're making.
So you have to have seven reference letters to start, correct?
Correct.
And then those, if you do not make it the first year, they roll over to the second and third year, but you are allowed or required additional reference letters the next.
You are allowed 3. I've had people say, well, it's not a requirement. I think it would be foolish to not get 3. So your first year of submission, 5, it might be your next slide actually. So we could note. 5 of your reference writers must be AIA of some designation in good standing. You get 2 who are non-AIA, who are often, can speak to various specifics. In the subsequent submission years, if you aren't elevated the first year, the 3 can be anyone. So they don't need to be AIA members. So by your third year, you have 3 more who can be any designation.
Okay. So here's just a wrap up. We've talked about all of these things already. So now the objects. These are the now 6 objects that you will decide what to submit in. So design is pretty clear. You know, if you're a designer, if you're an urban designer, if you do historic preservation, and that is your portfolio, that's what you trade in, you're going to go into the design category. And again, we talked a little bit about this before. Don't have to have won national honor awards, but if you've got broad acceptance and recognition of your design work within a regional context, then absolutely, we think you'd probably be a good candidate there.
They do like national industry awards. It doesn't necessarily have to be
Correct.
an AIA national award, but they do like, particularly the recent jury.
Yeah, so correct. That's a good point. So like if you do a lot of work in preservation, you're probably not going to get a lot of awards from AIA, but there are lots of other regional and local organizations around the country that do give awards. So practice management. We've got a bit of a change here this year. Practice used to include education as well.
And research.
And research, yeah. And they have broken that out now. So practice is, traditional firm practice or technical advancement. And then specialty practice as well. So if, you do a specific building type, what have you, maybe you do senior living and that's all you do, but you're the best in the country of doing senior living, then you'll go in the practice area. Led the institute or related organizations. So this is where the AIA junkies come in. So if you've been working on AIA committees forever and you have contributed an awful lot to the AIA, you would submit in this category. Also, if you have been in a related organization, like we had somebody just 2 years ago, I think it was, who, and none of us knew who this individual, but he got submitted under our chapter. He actually was the national president of Design Build Institute of America, and one of the big leaders in design build in this country.
Another favorite is NCARB.
Yeah, yes, yes, lots of NCARB related fellows. So number 4 is public service, government, or industry. So if you work for educational institution, this is generally where you're going to be. If you work for a building standards department, something like that, this is where you're probably going to submit in. Or another industry, then this would be your area. The catch-all, what used to be the catch-all, is alternative career, volunteer service to society. So lots of different ways to look at this, and we've had some in the past. We actually had one recently who submitted under Led the Institute because she was so involved in AIA. We thought it was an absolute shoo-in for her to be submitted under Leading the Institute, and the jury decided that what her accomplishments looked like was more service to society. Even though that a lot of that service came through the AIA, they chose to actually move her into service to society. And
that's because that jury cycle was demanding national level service.
Okay. And then the newest one is education, literature, and research. As we said, this was actually in the old section 2. And so you had 52% of all the new fellows coming from object 2. That might be split in half this coming year with this new category, because half of those folks were probably in education, literature, and research. So that's a new object 6, which will be interesting for us to look at. Okay, so the jury. Here's who we have, the 7 members of the jury. One is from North Central States, one from Mid-Atlantic, one from Western States. He's a past president of AIA, one from California, and one from right here in North Carolina. Some of you on this call may know Anna. We need to tell you that you cannot talk to her about this. She's not really allowed to engage fellow candidates. Cheryl, you probably have some more insight into that.
Right. When the national jury meets to review and deliberate over all of these, there's a reason they have this geographic diversity. And that's because prior to their deliberations, they receive a list from AIA of all the candidates who have submitted, just the names and where they're from. And one of the things they do is, if you're from North Carolina or from our South Atlantic region, Anna Wu or whomever represents that region cannot review your submittal. So they assign primary responsibilities to each of these jurors in the first round of in-depth review. And nobody from that juror's region can be included in their primary review responsibilities or presentation to the whole jury. And that's for obvious reasons.
They also don't vote on someone from their region.
That's right. They also can't vote for someone from their region. And so there's a strategic way that they go through. AIA is very careful about making sure that those jurors see the list of names long before they are assigned those, to be sure that the other thing would be not just from your region, but if you had a contractual relationship with someone, let's say Anna, for example, was working directly with a firm at UNC Charlotte, and they had a contracted relationship working for the campus, she would have to disqualify herself and tell that reason why she couldn't review them, even though they might be from, I don't know, North Dakota. So they're very careful about getting these conflicts of interest, resolved prior to that. But it is a point of disqualification if any of you know her well as a mentor, as a potential employer. If you try to talk to her about it, lobby her about it, nudge her that, hey, I might be submitting this year, I mean, that is grounds for disqualifying you from consideration. And not just this year, this would be 3 years after her service, after she rolls off of this.
Oh, it's 3 years.
It's 3 years after that, unless that's just changed, Rebecca.
No, I think it's the same.
Okay.
So that is something to be very cognizant of. But let's say you know another juror from another part of the country. The same thing applies. They might ultimately see your submittal as part of that review, and that's okay. But I couldn't call RK Stewart from the Western States and say, RK, we worked together all this time on NCARB stuff, and I just wanted you to know I'm submitting this year. Mm-hmm. Any words of advice? Well, the first thing he should do is immediately say, stop right there.
Right.
But I'm not allowed to talk to you, and it could result in your disqualification. So don't say, hey, I know him, that's great. That may get you disqualified.
So would Anna be prohibited from doing reference letters for 3 years after she leaves the jury?
I think so.
Okay.
I'd have to look into that specifically.
Yeah, she'll verify that, but typically they have a 3-year moratorium.
Okay.
After the person rolls off the national jury.
Interesting. Okay. So the process they go through is each juror is given a percentage of the total to review. And actually, I'm going to let you talk about this, Cheryl, because you know it better than I do.
Well, once they've assigned each juror their proportionate share of candidates to review, they receive those submittals, and only those submittals, to begin a review. Typically, those jurors will have sort of their criteria, and they'll have a working list of how they are scoring things internally, because that person is going to spend a lot of time long before the jury meets reviewing your submittal. And they might spend anywhere from 2 to 4 hours per submittal. And when the jury convenes, that person that reviewed yours in depth will be doing a very 5-minute overview of your submittal to the rest of the group. So those candidates, the voting jurors, seeing your submittal for 5 minutes, that's the whole group seeing it for 5 minutes, with a person that spent 3 or 4 hours on yours doing a very targeted summary on behalf of you.
So this issue came up in another committee meeting we had the other day. Does every submission get heard by the full jury?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not like when you're assigned as a juror, you get a fraction. It's not like you only bring forward those that you want to.
No, they do look at everyone.
Okay.
They are required and to sort of be the advocate, and not in terms of whether you should be elevated or not. They are an advocate in the sense that they must give a fair representation, short abbreviated, of your submittal.
Okay.
And then the whole group will, of course, see all of those short presentations. They will see all the reference letters of anybody. So once they're being projected on the board, anybody else in the room can look further in detail and ask questions and get it more in detail.
Great. Okay, so you pretty much went over all of this anyways. Yeah, don't need to, you've talked about deliberation already. These are the so what questions, again, that the jury is going to ask themselves when they go through your submission. So have you been nationally recognized? Do you have a ripple effect? What is that effect? And have you been active in the AIA as well? Because let's remember, this still is an AIA honor. We do get a lot of folks that will submit that maybe have not done a whole lot of AIA activity, which might be fine as long as you've got a really substantial portfolio of contributing to the profession. But so much of this is still about, has a lot of this been done through AIA activity. Again, published work and awards recognition is huge. And then lecturing and also leadership at a regional or national level. Again, publications and awards, they're basically just covering the same stuff here. And then the sharing of knowledge or expertise, we've talked a lot about that already.
Or the same.
Yeah, pretty much the same. All right, so we're at the end, resources. So I wanted to give you guys the link to the national website, and I think I have it here. So honors and awards. Okay, so here is the honors and awards page for
If the link, yeah.
So there we go, for fellowship. So this is what you'll see when you go on the website. This presentation is actually here. and it is downloadable. Right here.
There's a sample application right there. You
Yeah,
see
this
that
is,
link?
yeah,
That shows you what's in the online submission so
Yeah.
that you can be prepared and start to think about what all they're going to ask you.
yeah, you definitely going to want to go to this site and look through all of this information here. Trying to remember, submission site will open 29th.
The best examples that you're on right there are great. Great.
Yeah. So a lot of what we've been talking about here may seem very scattered to you, and I totally understand that. This will be the best way to go and look at how all of the things we've been talking about get put together in a submission, because the best examples are the best place for you to start to look at. And they've got tons of them here from each one of the 5 objects. Oh, also at the very bottom here, this presentation is right here. It's linked right here. That's where I got it from. Okay. All right. So let's see. Any other questions? And yeah, contacts for honors and awards. And I can send you this presentation as well. I'll just send it out to the whole group once we collect all the emails. But that website is going to be your best start if you're just starting to think about fellowship submission. All right, so I've done a lot of talking. Everybody else done a lot of talking. How about questions for us at this point? Feel free to unmute yourself.
I'm going to have to jump off at 1:30, but I did want to say David has my contact information, and I'm always here just as a coach for people as they get started. If you have questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat here. You know, I'm happy to advise people on, you know, what they think their case might be, or if you have any questions at all. So I just dropped my email in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rebecca. As always, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rebecca. David, what are the dates for our pinups?
Yes, so the dates for our pinups. Let me figure out where I have that. Hold on a second.
While you're looking at that, just by way of explanation, we'll typically do pinups in a day in Charlotte and a day in Raleigh. We'll schedule those for you. It'll be pretty much an hour of an audience with the Fellows Committee, and we will go through your application, and basically it's a coaching session. North Carolina does that in ways that most states do not, and it's a huge benefit. So I encourage everybody thinking about doing this to prepare very well for this, the first one in particular. Get as far as you can with the presentation, because the further you can get, the better impact this committee can be in helping you put together your case and helping you achieve elevation.
So the dates we have penciled in are August 5th and 6th for the first pinup, and then September 2nd and 3rd for the second pinup. And we just learned today that the submission is October 8th. So I'll change that when I get to that.
Dave and Charles, is there a step before you get to the pinups? I mean, are you guys going to have a meeting with, if there are candidates who have not been tapped by the Fellows Committee who are interested in the process, what's the next step?
Yes, thank you for asking that. So we have identified April 30th as a candidate workshop. So typically what we have done is used this time to do both the Demystifying Workshop, and then talk to our potential candidates about where they fall in the process. But because we opened this up and we knew it was going to be a bigger thing today, we've decided to do a separate candidate workshop, which we have tentatively put on the calendar as April 30th. I actually think we probably might want to move that, Charles, simply because I don't think we've had the opportunity to talk to everybody at this point beforehand. So I don't have, let's see, April, May, April 30th is here. I'm thinking we're probably going to move that to the first or second week of May at this point. But let's you and I talk about that.
Okay.
But yeah, so those of you on the call today who have been talked to by our committee already, we're going to try to have this separate workshop where we're going to have you back and we're going to talk to you about further steps. And then there's a few other folks that we've not been able to get to yet that we need to talk to before this next workshop.
And everybody else, there are a lot of people on this call. You're here because somebody thought you should be here today. If you're not going to seek fellowship this year, get a shoebox.
Right.
Get a cardboard shoebox or a digital shoebox and start putting your stuff in it.
Right.
2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to be glad you've got that shoebox with your stuff in it. Come to a pinup. You'll learn a lot at a pinup, whether you're submitting or not. And if you're thinking about it all, go ahead and start putting together a submission. It's never too early to get started. And I can tell you from experience, it can get really late if you wait late in life.
Yeah, and it's hard to find things too if you don't have that shoebox, for sure. So those of you who might be a little bit younger on this call, get that shoebox and make sure everything you do, you're putting a copy into it. Very good point. All right, we'll be back at you with the next meeting, but it'll be after April 30th. I'm pretty sure at this point.
Sounds good. Great meeting, everybody. Thanks to everybody for being here and being a part of this, and we look forward to seeing what your shoebox looks like.
Yeah, and please feel free to reach out to me, Charles, anybody else on the committee. We're happy to talk to you if you've got more questions about this.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Appreciate you attending today.
Bye-bye.
Bye.